Welcome to the EW Podcast. I'm Eric White. In this episode, I speak with Laura Hooper about the Enneagram Prison Project, or the EPP. Laura is a certified guide and program manager for the EPP. Here, we talk about how the EPP is helping to rehabilitate incarcerated populations with the Enneagram personality test and why this is a useful approach. If you're not familiar with the Enneagram, I would recommend having at least a surface level understanding of what it is before listening. If you want to learn more, you can check out episode 26 of the EW podcast with Roxanne Harrison, who is a Enneagram coach and trainer. Or you can visit the Enneagram Prison Project website, where they do provide a quick overview. Links to both of these sources can be found in the notes for this episode. And just one quick note before getting into this conversation, I do plan on posting videos of the interviews to YouTube by the end of next month, or perhaps not until 2021. But this is something that is currently in the works, and I'm looking forward to sharing the videos of these discussions. I'll also be posting shortened clips to YouTube, so if you're the type of person who needs their information presented in less than an hour, say like 5 to 10 minutes, subscribing at YouTube might be a good option for listening to these. So you can head over to YouTube and subscribe to the EW Podcast, all one word, or visit the website to find links to the YouTube as well. And I will just note here that if you are listening to this clip relatively close to the date it was released, the website is currently under construction, so you will not be able to actually log into it. I'm redesigning the entire site and hope to have it up by 2021. So that's all for now. Let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Laura Hooper from the Enneagram Prison Project. So I'm here with Laura Hooper. Laura is a program manager and certified guide for the Enneagram Prison Project. Really appreciate you taking the time today to speak with me, Laura.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So I think I'll just start by kind of outlining my interest in the topic and maybe setting something of a goal for the conversation. So you're kind of a point along this journey for me in my Enneagram discovery. I interviewed a mutual friend, Roxanne Harrison, about the Enneagram, got typed by her. I'm actually taking a course through her with my girlfriend. So that's been cool. And she pointed me in the direction of the Enneagram Prison Project because my podcast was about mental health. I went through a period of my own depression, and kind of this is a fruit of that struggle, this podcast. I've kind of moved to discussing things that cover society and some other topics of interest, but I think this is a really cool fit because obviously there's a mental health aspect to it and very much important to society also. So I think it's a cool overlap.
Well, I love to hear that, you're turning your experiencing into something that you can share with others. I think a lot of us struggle with mental health more than we realize. So just thank you, and really appreciating that you're putting your energy towards helping others. And Roxanne is wonderful. So I'm sure she is steering you in a good direction as you start your Enneagram journey.
Yeah, for sure. She's been great. And I appreciate your work too, Laura. I've done some research into the Enneagram Prison Project, and I'm just really excited to have this conversation because I think it's such a cool way to help inmate populations rehabilitate and enter society so that they're productive and perhaps setting themselves up to not go back to prison, which, we all have a stake in that. It's important to everybody, even if we never have an experience with the law, because, it's taxpayer money paying for prisons. We want people in our society to be well-adjusted and functioning, contributing. So,
absolutely.
So do you want to just kind of start us off with your background? How did you discover the Enneagram? How did you discover EPP? Which came first?
Yeah.
The whole details.
Sure. So I grew up in rural Pennsylvania and moved to California about 8 years ago, and actually worked for the federal government for 14 years. And towards the end of my time there, I was really I like to say I was on the softer side of Department of Defense. I was on the workforce development side of the house. And I got this idea. I had experienced a great coach. So I got this idea that we should start an in-house coaching program. And they bought off on it and said, well, yeah, let's do that. You can head it up, but you have to go get certified to be a coach. And I said, well, of course. I mean, that was part of what I wanted. Fortunately for me, the school that I went to, the one I landed on, was New Ventures West. It's in San Francisco. It's a couple other places, but that's where their headquarters is. And it was a year-long program that a big part of it was introducing me to the Enneagram. I had worked with some other personality systems, but nothing quite like the Enneagram. And in the year that I spent there, probably the simplest way to put it is that program really cracked my heart wide open for myself and for others. And it's where I learned about EPP. And I actually just contacted EPP and said, hey, what can I do? I want to be part of this. What can I do to volunteer? This sounds amazing. And as I got to know the founder and the executive director, husband and wife team, really started to fall more and more in love with the project and with both of them and a lot of the students. And hadn't expected it, but they were growing. And it was like, do you want to join us? And it was one of those moments of, I don't think I can say no. I think cool. This is where I need to be. Yeah. So
what was it about the Enneagram specifically that you found different than other personality tests you had tried in the past?
I think the quickest answer I would say is the motivation, like really looking at what's the motivation underneath of my behavior. Like what is it that in 9 very different ways we all seek and feels like if we don't have what we need, we can't survive. Yeah. And then I think also the Enneagram for me, I continue to study it. It's been about 4 years that I've been working with it. And I'm constantly learning new things and constantly observing parts of myself that I'm not sure I would have seen otherwise or felt equipped or had compassion for those parts of myself without the tool.
And what's your type?
Type 7.
Type 7. So yeah. Do you want to give a brief outline? If someone has listened to the Roxanne Harrison podcast, I apologize for rehashing this, but just for context, do you want to just give some brief details about that?
Yeah. So type 7, we call them the epicure, the enthusiast. They really come to teach us about joy and freedom. They're in the head center. I know Roxanne talked a little bit about the 3 centers of intelligence. And so it's hard to see sometimes with the type 7, and it's taken me a while to unpack this, but really what's underneath is fear. Is a type 7, I want security more than anything. And so it may not look that way because I can have my fingers in a lot of things. I 7s like to try a lot of different things and really enjoy experiences and, don't want to be trapped. And so it's this freedom that they're seeking, but they often end up boxing themselves in with all those options and kind of running from stillness because underneath there is often some pain that can be really tough for a type 7. And that's been a big part of my journey is the shadow work, is seeing the tougher emotions and tougher experiences within me that I haven't, that I've over the past few years been able to unpack a bit more, but for a long time weren't even on my radar. So,
are you talking about like childhood traumas or something like that?
Yeah. A very quick example is, I got married very young and got divorced, and I thought I was the poster child for how you get through a divorce. It was painful, but I got through it. It was fine. And it was so great to have freedom. I was married 7 years. It wasn't, a few minutes. It was pretty lengthy. And I've now looked back and seen that was a coping strategy. That was the defense mechanism rationalization. And I'm really good at that. And it happens so quickly. So yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
let's get into the prison work that
Sure.
EPP does. So can you describe your role as a certified guide? You're one of the touch points for the program within the prisons, correct?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So we teach in prisons and jails. And right now, most of our programs are on hold because of COVID. But we are teaching here locally. I'm in San Francisco Bay Area, and there is a jail that we're teaching at. They have been absolutely amazing and working with us. So we're teaching in a way we've never taught. Pre-COVID, we would be in a classroom with the incarcerated folks, working with them that way. And now what we're doing in this county jail is myself and a co-guide. We're actually teaching via Zoom. So we are in separate rooms, and then we're broadcasting to 2 separate rooms, about between 5 and 10 in each room of incarcerated folks. And they have masks on, and there's one screen in the front of the room. So you can imagine quite a few challenges. Yeah. But it really is, it's the reason we use the word guide, because we're actually, this is an individual journey we really invite folks into this place of self-awareness, self-regulation, all under the umbrella of self-compassion. So we support and guide folks through that, but it's really on them, right? It's really an invitation to do the work.
And this is I think I read an 8 to 20 week program. Is that correct?
Yeah, so. That's absolutely right. Yep. 8 to 20 weeks. Because in jails, often the turnover is a lot more. So it's not uncommon for us to start a class in a jail, and you might start with 20, and by the end you may have half. Because folks are getting either sentenced or released. The sentences are much smaller, or they're waiting for their sentencing to head to prison. So in the jail setting, we're often teaching 8, 10, or 12 weeks. And then in the prison setting, we will often have a much longer course of 20 weeks. So it's essentially the same curriculum. We're just able to go a lot deeper in those 20 weeks.
And how are people who are incarcerated signing up for this course? Is this something that is like an elective that they can choose to take part in? Yeah,
it is. We actually don't ever program where it's mandatory. Believe it or not, you can't force people to do self-work. So yeah, we've definitely learned that people need to decide for themselves that they want to be part of this.
That probably makes a big difference in how people get through the program, right? Leaving the choice up to them. They probably have more willingness to be open and to see it through, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because even when they don't, if they put their hand up and say, I want to be part of this, and then there can be hesitation because we do cover trauma, particularly childhood trauma, and we cover addiction. And so these aren't easy topics. But even as folks continue to come to the class, inviting them to even observe the resistance in themselves, right? Like just how much you can learn even from that. So,
yeah. And one of the videos you sent me, which I will make sure to post a link to in the show notes for this episode, I think it was with RJ Donovan. Is that right?
Yes.
RJ Donovan. Yeah.
Yep.
I was really blown away by the level of openness that the gentlemen were getting to. And I think one of them said, like, I revisited my past and I stayed there. And it was just like, wow, how long had it been since he had led himself to go back there and to share it openly in that kind of setting? Is that a common thing you see with your work?
It's really common. That is one of the biggest reasons I couldn't say no to joining EPP. The first time I went to San Quentin, I was in a room with about 50 men in blue, incarcerated men, and it was the most real, authentic. I mean, it was just, at that point I was, teaching with my government job, and I just couldn't get over like, oh my goodness, in this room, it's just, everybody's so real. They drop right into the truth. And it was mind blowing. It was not the place where I expected to experience that. But I see that in most of our classes. One of the required assignments in our classes is actually writing a biography. And we invite the participants to write it in third person to give themselves a little space and kind of observe. And we start with earliest memory up through about 18 or so. And so, the response to that can be very different, but I have had many bios that come in that share with me for the first time something they've never shared with anyone. And wow. Some of them, it's heartbreaking, quite frankly, but it is trauma that needs to be processed. So just the invitation to actually tell your story and to have somebody mirror back to you what they're hearing, and to let you know that it's okay and it's part of who you are.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And I think it highlights something that kind of sucks with our society a little bit, is that that level of openness isn't encouraged. Like you said, it's not mandatory to do self-work. It's not mandatory to explore those types of things. But, whenever it gets out of hand or influences decision-making in a negative way, it has serious repercussions, right? And we all pay for that in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. We are, it's what we say at EPP, we're all in the prisons of our own making. And it's so true. Whichever side of the bars you're on, we really are.
So I'm curious, like, how does this compare to what's currently available? Like, what is a prison inmate or someone who's being released from jail likely to do in terms of rehabilitation, and how does it compare to what the EPP offers?
So that's a pretty big question.
Okay.
And it really depends on what facility you're in. There are some jails and prisons that are really at the forefront in offering tons of great programs, and a lot of times that is because of location. Like San Quentin's a great example. Pre-COVID, they have so many programs because they're right next to San Francisco. So you have tons of great organizations that can support and come in. We have some folks that are part of EPP, and while incarcerated there, learned how to code, right? So they came out with great jobs that they could get. But you go to other places where there aren't nearly as many resources, you won't have the options for all that programming. So I can't give you a specific, like, here's exactly what it would look like, because it's right. So different at every prison and jail. And there are a lot of really good programs out there. I think what EPP offers is a community to really look inside, and the way we present the Enneagram and the way we invite folks in is to start with what's right with you. I think that's different than a lot of programs, whether it's the Enneagram or something else. I think most of us as humans look to what's wrong with me, what can I fix? And we really start with, there's nothing wrong with you. What's right about you? What are the gifts that you have that you were born with? And maybe you're defended and maybe you've covered those gifts up, right? But like, how do we get back to that place? So I really think that approach is probably what sets us apart from other programs.
Do people who go through the program, in your experience, have a hard time finding those things? Like, is that something that they have a hard time discovering in themselves as something good?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And I think it's inside, incarcerated or not, I think it's something we all struggle with. I think we all have an inner critic that gets in our way, there for good reason, but really gets in our way to see what's right about us, to see what's good. So yeah, and it is, imagine, I've heard Susan, our founder, introduce it this way, and it's just a beautiful way to do it, is imagine that you have to walk around every day and be judged on the biggest mistake of your life. It's pretty hard when you're in prison or jail, and that's essentially what's happening, like everybody knows you're in there for something. And then to be able to, in the midst of all of that, believe that there's goodness in you and actually tap into your essence. Yeah, it's pretty tough.
Yeah. Whenever you said that answer, I was like, yeah, you're right. That's, I struggle with that too. That's not just exclusive to people who have gotten caught up in a bad system.
Yeah.
So what does the program look like inside? How is, what is taught? I know from my experience with Roxanne, we've had 2 classes so far, and it's been spent kind of giving background about the Enneagram, going into the types. Like, is it a pretty similar thing with the EPP?
Yeah, so we spend, the way we refer to it is building a container. We spend a lot of time building a container. To do this kind of work, you have to be safe. And it's pretty tough to feel safe just in general in life. And I think when you add in prison or jail, not the safest places in the world. So before we even, get into the Enneagram, we spend a lot of time building a safe container, making it clear why we are there, understanding emotional responsibility. And then we also spend a lot of time on trauma. We use the adverse childhood experience. Are you familiar with ACE?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So it's the ACE study was done in the late 90s. It was done with CDC and Kaiser Permanente did the study. There were about 17,000 participants. And essentially, I could spend all day there, but I'll just say essentially it's a list of 10 questions, and they are adverse childhood experiences. And so you read through the list, and if any of these happen to you, you give yourself a 1. And so it's from, was there physical abuse in your home? Yes or no? Did a parent have a substance abuse? Yes or no? Parent in prison? Were you, molested? Like all of these really hard things that children go through, can go through. And so you score yourself on this ACE test, and your score is either, 0 to 10, anywhere in between there. So what they did when they did this study was they looked at all of that and said, wow, like if your score is 4 or higher, your chances for heart disease increase significantly. Your life expectancy actually drops. So there's, real connection of like how these experiences affect you, how this childhood trauma affects you long-term, your health and every part of your life. So we actually start there because a lot of our participants have very high ACE scores. And a lot of times the response is, well, that's just the way it is, right? Like that's just the way it was in my home. And so even just helping people understand like that isn't actually the way it should have been. And the attachment and the conditions you were brought up in play a really big part into how your brain is set up and how your type structure shows up and how tightly you hold to that type structure. Because if it was a matter of survival as a child versus, really stable and you could explore and be safe and all of that, totally different experiences and totally different as far as how your personality is going to surface and how you're going to cope with that. Yeah.
So you start with basically a process of self-discovery and kind of build the foundation of helping them understand who they are before you get into how the Enneagram relates to that.
Correct. Yep. We do a good bit on just basics on brain chemistry, because a lot of our folks have not finished high school. Many have, but so just some basics on this is actually how your brain works. Here's how trauma affects that. And then we also get into addiction. And so once we get through trauma, addiction, and just some basics, here's how the course is laid out, then we get into the Enneagram.
I'd imagine that the typing maybe brings a little bit of levity, a little bit of fun to the classroom. Is that accurate? That it can, because I know for us it's been fun to be curious and be like, oh wait, I'm this. No, maybe I'm this. Does that become kind of a moment of brightness for them? Yeah,
it does. I mean, and it's so, yeah, it absolutely does for some. And for others, it's, ew, I'm this type. But also there can be levity there. So, and we always encourage folks, especially when you're starting out, like, hold it lightly. If you come back and you say, I think I'm these 3 types, that's fine. Let's dig in a bit more, because there's some lookalike types and there's, all sorts of reasons that you may be coming up with all these possibilities. But as we go through the course, we more and more dig into like, what's the motivation under there? What did you need as a child and maybe not get? And let's go back a bit and see if we can figure it out.
Yeah. And how in your view does that understanding that motivation help them avoid coming back to prison? How does that provide a framework for them?
I think that it allows folks to observe the motivation, right? Like observe the story that's playing out in their life versus being caught up in it and just, this is what I do, this is how I am. We spend a good bit before every class, we spend time getting present. So we do a brief presence practice, short meditation, and we encourage folks throughout the entire course to start their own meditation practice. And so that so important ability to pause before action, right? And like see, oh, there goes that thing again. Like for me as a type 7, oh, there goes that. I think I'm trapped, whatever situation I'm in, and I just want to run. Like it turns out that keeps coming up for me. It's not disappearing. Even all this work, it's not disappearing. So just, learning to observe what's really going on. and make a choice then, right? But all of that, like I said, is with self-compassion, which I think is one of the toughest things, and I suspect will keep me busy the rest of my life, learning self-compassion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's one thing I've definitely noticed in my experience with the Enneagram has just been that it is kind of like whenever you are looking at your decision making or where your attention goes, it is a form of mindfulness, right? It is like a mini meditation almost of like just observing, like you said. So
yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any success stories you might share of like someone you've worked with or someone you've heard that maybe you can illustrate how this works?
Yeah, so we actually at EPP, we actually have what we call ambassadors. And they are folks that completed our program while incarcerated. And then when they get out, they reached out because we can't actually reach out to folks. They have to make that first step. So we have quite a few ambassadors actually, but I'll highlight a couple of them, or at least one. The one that's really coming to mind is Sue. She took our program, I want to say about 5 years ago. She took it a few times while she was incarcerated. And then she reached out when she got out. And she actually went through a lot of additional Enneagram training and really came into our community in a big way. And so she's gone through our guide training program. So she's a fully certified guide. She was actually just substituting with me last week in a county jail. And it was her first time back into the same jail where she had been incarcerated, which is beyond amazing. And she was thrilled. But she actually heads up our reconnecting program, which is something we do once a week. Now it's on Zoom. It used to be in person. But being on Zoom is actually beautiful because it's a closed group to some extent. It's really for folks that were previously incarcerated and want to keep doing this work and do it in a safe space. Mm-hmm. And she, oh my goodness, she puts so much love and energy into that space of just getting it ready every week, making sure folks are there and supporting them even on whatever they're doing for reentry. But she has created this amazing space that once a week folks drop in and we do breakout rooms and it's like what I described at San Quentin. It's like an anchor in the week of let's just be real and let's talk about how tough life is and what we're up against in our own personalities, right? So she's a great example of what's possible.
Cool.
Yeah, I have so many examples because we have quite a few ambassadors and they're all they're truly brilliant folks that's really what EPP is all about, is these folks that have been incarcerated and how they have so much to teach the rest of us about healing.
Yeah, that's like the getting through that and using this tool to better your life and not become a recidivism statistic is a massive, massive growth. I mean, I think I've seen in a couple of places it's around like 40 to 50% in California and nationally. So, to beat that number with a tool like this is awesome for sure. Is there any, like, in your experience, what sort of crimes are the people in the program dealing with? Is there a limit to a criminal history that is too far to help, or is in your view, is it possible for anyone to make a change with the right tools?
Honestly, I think it's possible for anyone. I really do. I think if a human can get to a place where they want to take a real look at themselves and step into the possibility that they aren't broken and that they can heal. And we often say we teach people how to reparent themselves, right? So most of our students had not the ideal childhood, not the ideal parenting. And so now as an adult, what can I give, I'll use my own name. What can I give little Laura that she didn't have in childhood? And I think we all need that to some extent. And sometimes when I read somebody's biography or hear their story, I think, and even if it is someone that, has taken someone else's life, for example, when I read their story, I think to myself often, like, where were we when they were 10 years old? going from group home to group home and maybe being molested and, you know, you name it, maybe starting a drug addiction at that age. Where were we as a society then? And then I can start to understand, like, oh, you were in serious pain. I'm not saying it's okay that you took a life. That's not at all what I'm saying. But as I piece together the story, I can see the pain underneath the behavior. I can see the, wow, like that's really, I get it, right? And so, yeah, I don't think, I think everybody can heal. I really do. I mean, mind you, I am an idealist, but I really do believe it.
Yeah, I share that belief, Laura, for sure. Is there like people in the program that do not have the chance to get out still taking the program, or is this mostly being taken by individuals who have the prospect of leaving prison or jail?
Yep, we've definitely had folks with life sentences taking the program, especially at San Quentin. And we've had some folks that ended up getting paroled, and we have some folks that are still in and will most likely never get out. But yeah, they're continuing the self-work and, you know, wanting to make the best of the life that they have. I'm often super amazed at how much most of the folks that I come in contact with that are incarcerated actually want to give back and really want to help other people and want to, like, I was just working on a response to a bio this morning, and the gentleman's been in for about 8 years, and he just said, you know, I really want to share my story so other people don't make this mistake. And that, I hear that all the time. Like, I can't not believe there's goodness in all of us.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that for sure. And it says, like you were saying, it says a lot about our society. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to mention in this podcast was, you know, looking at how successful people are in a society or a civilization or a country or whatever is a fine metric to see how good people are doing. But I think, you know, looking at how the other end of the spectrum is maybe more informational or more illuminating, if you will, about what is going on in that society. And we have such a prison population here in the U.S. that, you know, there needs to be some sort of solution to help them re-enter and reintegrate with the rest of us.
Yes, absolutely. I could not agree more. We actually program in Belgium and France, and how we got into the prison in Belgium was actually through a warden there. He had reached out. He was teaching staff members the Enneagram and really wanted to bring it to the other side, to the incarcerated folks. And he's an absolutely lovely human. And I finally met him face to face about a year ago. He was in California, and he said, you know, I always teach the guards, teach everybody in the prison, treat the incarcerated men and women like your neighbors, because someday they might be. And I just thought, like, wow, like, just imagine if that's the approach we took. Like, who do I want to be my neighbor, right? Like, how do I want to care for my neighbor? Because quite literally, you may be my neighbor someday, and you're human, and I want to care for you as if you're my neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. I'd never thought about it like that, but yeah, that's true. I live in an apartment in downtown San Diego. Who's to say who's living next to me? It could be someone who's had a growth experience like this after difficult times. I mean, I know I have. You know, I've had my own incidents in the past that I'm not super proud of. That, you know, you need a chance to grow, and you need the tools around you, right?
Absolutely.
Sorry to cut you off.
Oh no, you're fine. No need to apologize at all.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess that kind of gets into why people should care about this, right? About how prisoners or jail populations are being rehabilitated for society. Do you have any particular views yourself that you want to expound on more about that, or have we kind of covered that in your mind?
I think we've covered it. I could, of course, you know, I could go on and on, but for me, it just comes down to, I think everybody needs a safe place to learn to love themselves, because if we all are in that space, then that's what's going to flow out of us as love. And, you know, that's the world that I would like to live in and move towards. Yeah.
Is there any statistics or recidivism info that you can share about the program? I know we talked briefly before we started recording about this, but maybe you can just share what we talked about.
So it's tricky to calculate recidivism rates because a lot of times, well, always, we have to get those from the facility. And it, as you can imagine, it can be pretty tough to get down to, like, let's say someone is incarcerated and they're taking 10 programs, for example. That's pretty big number, but it's pretty hard to actually say this is what did the trick, right?
Right.
So there's lots of great information out there, but I don't have anything that I would want to hang my hat on or be real specific. But I will say something that we're doing at EPP that I am so excited about is we had a group of a team within EPP that said, hey, let's create this program outcome survey where we, give it at the beginning, give it at the end, so we can actually see, like, can we measure how people are doing with these skills like self-awareness, self-regulation, self-compassion? How are they, are they exhibiting pro-social behaviors? What's the change from the beginning of the course to the end? It took us about a year to put it together because it's very thorough. It's actually, we worked with some mental health experts, and so it's a very good tool. So we got it ready, and then COVID hit. We've been able to administer it in 3 very small classes. So we don't have anything substantial yet, but I'm really excited. I think when we get back to the place where we're in more prisons and jails and back to what, quote unquote normal, this is a tool that I think will really help us show and measure. This is what a student was day one. And then whether they're in an 8, 12, 20-week course, this is what those same questions were at the end of it.
Right. So it's not exactly measuring, like, if that person went through the course and ended up back in jail. It's more about how do they view themselves in relation to the questions that are being asked. Yeah, it's more of that. I mean, I know that we have hopes of moving towards tons of data. But as you probably are aware, most nonprofits are usually have more work than they have resources. So we definitely try to live from abundance and not live in a scarcity mindset. But there's also a realistic piece of, we put our energy, we don't always have the energy or resources for more of that. What are your views on how the successes of this program might be used to help people who are not in prison or jail, and how can we use this information to help people avoid that cycle? Yeah.
So interestingly, when COVID hit and we pretty much all programming stopped, both in Europe and here, all the jails and prisons we were in, they, for very good reason, you cannot come in. And we were looking around and we're like, okay, what does this mean for us? And we actually did a pretty big pivot for the first time because we've always been so focused on the incarcerated population. We did a big pivot and we actually started offering a portion of our curriculum to the public. And the response has been amazing. We started a course called 9 Prisons, 1 Key. And we did a pilot, and then we did our first iteration. We've had, I believe it's over 200 people go through the course. And actually just today we're starting our second round, and we have about 160 folks signed up this time. We actually have more people interested than we can support. We don't have quite enough capacity. Yeah. It is. It's a really good problem, but it's a beautiful thing to watch everybody on the outside realize how much our personalities have created a prison for us, and how do we break out of that prison? And it creates this beautiful community because we do it all on Zoom and in smaller cohorts. It's been really amazing to watch. And I actually think it's going to, over time, provide more of a bridge than we had before, because you'll have folks incarcerated and folks on the outside learning the same curriculum and having that shared experience. Very different environments, of course, but I'm really excited to see what it leads to for us.
Is that being offered to like at-risk populations, or is that just being offered to anyone who hears about it?
Anyone who hears about it. And we do intend to move towards some at-risk populations. And one of the things that excites me most, it's actually our pricing model is donation-based, because we want everybody that wants this information to come towards us. And it's worked out. We've said, here's how much we needed to raise for the first round. We exceeded that goal. And that was without saying, here's the price just for you, right? Because for some people, a few $100s, they wouldn't be able to come in the door. For other folks, hey, I can cover a few people. And so it's actually been really beautiful to just watch it play out. And we really want it to be inclusive and accessible. And so far, it's, proving to be that.
And you guys are completely donation funded, the Enneagram Prison Project?
We have some grants through some prisons and jails. And then the bulk of it is donation based. Yes.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I guess this might be a good place to just point out that on your website, it says, it costs $500 to put an inmate through an 8-week program and $47,000 to incarcerate an individual for 1 year. So if anyone listening feels like this is a cool idea, I would highly recommend going and making a donation if possible, because it's better than paying those taxes, right? And having people incarcerated. I definitely, you can have your opinions about capitalism and stuff, but I do feel like, if you can make the incentive of money align with something that's good for society, then people might be more willing to buy into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you quote the price, the $47,000 versus 500, right? Like it's a very big difference.
Yeah. A huge difference.
Yeah.
So how can people, like, what's available to people to get involved if someone hears this and wants to, do more than donate? They want to donate their time, for example.
Yeah.
What can they do?
Well, first off, I would say add your name to the waiting list for 9 Prisons, 1 Key. It's a great course, whether you know the Enneagram or you're brand new to it. It's a great space to learn it. And then I would also say head to the website. There's a few different spots there, and you can email a couple different spots where you can email us, reach out. And we do even have a volunteer registration form. And that's a place where you can fill out your skills. You can tell us a little bit about yourself. And we certainly see those. And when they come in, we respond and we try to figure out where does it make sense to plug folks into the organization.
Cool. So the only level of, it's not as though if someone wanted to volunteer, they would have to be prepared to be interacting with the prison population. There's other ways to be involved.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have like a great example is, actually, she's in Southern California, similar to you. She heard us on a podcast. She heard Susan, our founder, and she happens to be a grant writer. And this aligned with her values. She loves the Enneagram, and she reached out and was like, hey, could you use a grant writer? And at the time I was doing a lot of our grant writing, and I'm not a grant writer. So of course I was like, yes, please come in. So absolutely. And, she does that virtually and supports us in that way. And so, yeah, I think that there are, we welcome people to bring their energy and come towards us and see what makes sense.
Yeah. And what about for being a certified guide like yourself? What sorts of qualifications need to be met to do that?
Yeah. So great question. And it has shifted. Previously we had a program for guide training that was really focused on this virtual portion of it. And then there was an in-person practicum, and then you did an apprenticeship in the jails before you went out and taught on your own. Again, COVID, I know I've brought it up a couple of times, but it's a big deal this year. Yep. So now we're actually in the process of shifting. And this 9 Prisons, 1 Key course is the first course in what we're calling the Path to Freedom. And so we're actually building it as we go. But we have our faculty members working on what we're calling stepping stones. So there's all these other courses coming along that will actually get you ready if that's that's where you want to head, is to be a guide.
And you don't need any previous experience working with people directly in that capacity? It
varies. We definitely stand behind do no damage when you go in. And so, we partner with a couple different Enneagram schools. So if you have an Enneagram certification, teacher certification before you come, big plus. If you have facilitation skills before you come, big plus. But it's really, all of those are incredibly helpful because we want you to be prepared to walk in, hold the space, and be able to facilitate and know the Enneagram well, of course. And more than that, we really want folks who have navigated their inner terrain and are really doing this work and are really aware of what's going on inside of them. And so that comes in varying degrees, as you can imagine.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything you'd like to add here at the end as we wrap up? Anything you feel like we missed that needs to be said?
I'll just say for EPP as a whole, I think one of the things that I've experienced that is so different is the way in which we embody our values, and one of them being that we do the work together. And I'll just say that that's really true. I am constantly doing my own work. And as I get triggered in different situations, we're a growing organization. And so there's all sorts of possibilities for that. Really stepping back and observing that in myself and figuring out what's going on inside of me and how is that coming out, and how can I, with people I work with, whether it's people on staff, whether it's people volunteering, whether it's ambassadors or folks that I'm teaching in custody, am I practicing unconditional positive regard? Am I believing the best in folks? And more than that, am I giving myself unconditional positive regard? Yes, I would. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
I was just going to say to be in a community where that's encouraged, embraced, and expected is pretty amazing. Yeah.
Can you explain that term, unconditional positive regard?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, I'm going to believe the best in you. It can be very simple in, I will work with folks who say, oh, I'm going to get that done by Monday, right? And Monday comes and it's like the old me in a more corporate environment, like, oh, they let me down. They, of course they didn't do what they said they were going to do. And now there's this invitation to trust that they're doing the best that they can, right? Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know why, but like noticing when I'm making up a story about either myself or somebody else, and like kind of cutting that off right away and asking myself, like, can I trust the best in them? Can I assume the absolute best in them? And that really translates to, how am I assuming the best in myself, right? Like, how am I being compassionate to myself, loving myself?
Kind of giving yourself and others the benefit of the doubt, and not buying into the narratives that you tell yourself. Yeah. Right. Well, I really appreciate chatting with you. This, like, the Enneagram has been a cool discovery. I'm still so new to it. Like, I needed you to remind me what the 7 was, because I feel like whenever I went through it, I absorbed the ones I thought I could be, and then just kind of haven't learned the other ones. But that's
a good way to start. I mean, honestly, I really recommend folks focus on yourself to start. The other pieces will come, but that's actually a really great way to start, is figure out what lands for you. And if I remember right, you were thinking maybe a type 3 for yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
okay.
Good memory. I think I've settled pretty well into that. Seems to fit. I seem to fall into like the getting super tunnel visioned on things I'm working on, and not regarding my own emotional state or tending to things that need to be dealt with, and kind of putting them off is all stuff that I do. So
do you notice, I'm glad you said it the way you did, because do you notice how immediately you went right to the downsides?
Yeah,
like,
I did.
Just how hard, like how quick that is for us as humans when it's ourselves. Like, let me look at the parts that need fixed. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I love that that's where you started, because it's so different to actually start with type 3. Oh, you come to teach us about value and preciousness. Just your being does that. Like, you walk in a room and there's value in you, and that's a gift for the world.
I appreciate that. Yeah. But don't you think, I mean, from my observation, it has seemed almost easier to look at the negatives when typing myself to, I don't know, there just seems to be more of a pattern that emerges whenever I look at the negatives. Is that your experience too?
Yes. I think it's much easier to focus on what needs fixed than to focus on what's really good. We're all, I think, from a young age trained to not, even when we're complimented, right? How awkward is it to take a compliment sometimes? Like, receiving is really hard, and it is such a muscle that needs worked.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Every time I receive a compliment, I just want to go, ooh, I don't deserve that.
Yeah. So. And what if you do? I think that's probably one of the scariest / invigorating questions. What if you do? What if you do deserve that? And what would it be like to live in a place that you could embrace your beautiful gifts?
Yeah, I'm sure that's a major topic of exploration within the EPP courses. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate your time, Laura.
Yeah. Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.